I watched a homeless kid, a boy with no name and no home, throw his body over a trucker's daughter to shield her from the boots of 3 grown men. He took the kick meant for her face, and I heard his nose break from 50 feet away. He didn't run. He just stayed there, curled on the wet asphalt, a human shield in a grease-stained coat taking a beating that would have killed a weaker man. I grabbed my winch bar, rage blinding me, ready to take them all on alone. But I wasn't the only one watching. As I stepped out into the rain, I didn't know that 50 tons of steel were about to shift in the darkness behind me, or that a simple act of courage by a boy with nothing was about to trigger a war that the state police wouldn't be able to stop. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? Drop your city and mile marker. We love seeing how far our stories travel. The night had started quiet, the kind of quiet that usually makes you nervous if you've been hauling long enough. I was parked at the Iron Skillet off I-80, just outside of Davenport, waiting out a mandatory 34-hour reset. The lot was packed tight, a sea of chrome and fiberglass gleaming under the harsh sodium lights. The air smelled of diesel exhaust, frying onions, and impending rain. I sat in the driver's seat of my Peterbilt, staring out at the rain-slicked asphalt, nursing a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My name is Jack Mercer, but most folks on the radio call me Redline. I keep to myself, haul heavy and try to stay out of trouble. But trouble has a way of finding you, especially when you're looking the other way. 2 spots down, a cherry-red Kenworth sat idling. I knew the rig. It belonged to Big Mike Miller, a solid hand from Nebraska I'd run Convoy with a few times during the winter storms of '19. Mike was inside grabbing a shower and a hot meal, leaving his rig running to keep the heater going for his daughter Sarah. She was maybe 12, a sweet kid who spent her summers riding shotgun with her dad. I'd seen her hop out a few minutes ago to stretch her legs, tossing a tennis ball against the concrete retaining wall at the edge of the lot. That's when I noticed the boy. He was a ghost of a thing, lurking near the dumpster behind the repair bays. Ragged jeans, a hoodie that had once been grey but was now almost black with grime, and boots held together with duct tape. He wasn't begging. He was just watching, eyes sharp, scanning the ground for dropped change or half-eaten sandwiches. I'd seen plenty of lot lizards and drifters in my time, but this was just a kid, a stray dog trying to stay invisible. I watched him in my mirrors, thinking about walking over with a spare sandwich from my cooler, but the fatigue in my bones kept me seated. I figured I'd catch him on my way into the diner later. Then the sedan rolled up. It was a rusted-out Honda with a fart can muffler and tinted windows, cruising slow through the back row like a shark in shallow water. It stopped right next to where Sarah was retrieving her ball. 3 guys piled out. They weren't kids, not really. Late teens, early 20s, the kind of small-town bullies who peaked in high school and were now just looking for something to break. They wore Letterman jackets that didn't fit anymore and baseball caps pulled low. I saw the driver say something to Sarah. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her recoil, shaking her head, clutching the tennis ball to her chest like a shield. I sat up straighter, my hand hovering over the door latch. The driver laughed and stepped closer, invading her space. He reached out and tugged one of her pigtails. Sarah slapped his hand away. That was the trigger. The guy's face shifted from mocking to ugly in a heartbeat. He grabbed her arm hard, yanking her away from the safety of her dad's truck. "Hey!" I shouted, shoving my door open. But before my boot hit the pavement, a blur of motion shot out from behind the dumpsters. It was the homeless kid. He didn't hesitate. He didn't check the odds. He hit the guy holding Sarah like a missile. A chaotic whirlwind of elbows and teeth. He was half their size, but he fought with the desperation of someone who had nothing to lose. The guy stumbled back, releasing Sarah, who scrambled backwards, screaming for her dad. "You little rat!" one of the friends yelled. That's when the kicking started. They swarmed him, 3 on 1. They threw him to the asphalt and started stomping. It was brutal, efficient violence. They weren't just hurting him, they were trying to erase him. I hit the ground running. I'm not a young man anymore, and my knees ache when the damp sets in, but rage is a powerful anesthetic. I covered the 30 yards in seconds. "Back off!" I roared, my voice dropping into that command tone I hadn't used since my days in the service. The ringleader, a tall kid with a scarring acne problem and mean eyes, looked up. He sneered, adrenaline making him stupid. "Mind your business, old man." This trash attacked me. He drew back his foot for another kick at the boy's head. I didn't slow down. I didn't negotiate. I stepped into his space, grabbed the front of his jacket with my left hand, and drove my right fist into his solar plexus. It wasn't a haymaker. It was a short, piston-like strike meant to collapse the diaphragm. The air left him in a whoosh, and he folded over my arm like wet laundry. I shoved him back into his friends. They stumbled, looking at me with wide eyes. They saw the grease under my fingernails, the scar running down my forearm, and the look in my eyes that said I was done talking. "Get in your car," I said, my voice low and steady. "Now." The ringleader was gasping for air on the ground, clutching his chest. His buddies looked at him, then at me, then at the wrench I'd grabbed from my door pocket on the way out. They decided they weren't that brave. They dragged their friend up and scrambled back into the Honda. "You're dead, man," the driver yelled as he peeled out, gravel spraying my shins. "You don't know who you messed with. My dad runs this county." I watched tail lights disappear around the corner, memorizing the plate number, before turning to the boy. He was a mess. His nose was broken, blood streaming down his chin onto that oversized coat. His left eye was already swelling shut. He tried to scuttle away when I knelt down, flinching like a beaten dog. "Easy, son," I said, keeping my hands where he could see them. "I'm not going to hurt you. You did good. You saved her." Sarah was still crying near the tires of her dad's rig. The door to the diner burst open, and Big Mike came running out, a half-eaten burger still in his hand, his eyes wild. "Sarah!" he bellowed. He scooped her up, checking her for injuries, his face a mask of panic. When she pointed at the boy and then at me, Mike's expression softened, then hardened into gratitude. He looked at the kid bleeding on the asphalt. "Did he—" Mike started. "He took the hits for her," I said, pulling a clean rag from my back pocket and handing it to the kid. "Press this to your nose. Tilt your head forward, not back." The boy took it, his hands shaking. I didn't want them to hurt her," he mumbled. His voice was raspy, unused. "You got a name, son?" I asked. "Leo," he whispered. "All right, Leo. Let's get you off the ground." Mike and I helped him up. He was light, painfully thin under the layers of clothes. We walked him over to my truck. I sat him on the passenger step and broke out my first aid kit. I've stitched up my own cuts in parking lots from Arizona to Maine, so I knew how to handle a busted nose and some road rash. Mike stood guard, pacing, his eyes scanning the darkness where the Honda had vanished. "Thank you, Jack," Mike said, his voice thick. I don't know what I would have done." "Thank the kid," I muttered, cleaning a gash on Leo's cheek with an alcohol wipe. Leo hissed but didn't pull away. He moved before I did. "I gotta call the cops," Mike said, reaching for his phone. I grabbed his wrist. "Wait, you hear what that punk said when he left? Said his dad runs the county." Mike frowned. "So? My kid was assaulted." "I know, but we're in a small town, Mike. If that kid is who I think he is, maybe the sheriff's son, maybe the mayor's, calling the local law might just bring the wolves to our door. Let's get the boy patched up first. Get a read on the situation." It was a cynical view, maybe, but I've been on the road 30 years. I've seen towns where the badge and the gavel sleep in the same bed as the trouble. Leo looked up at me with his one good eye. "It's Deputy Collins' kid," he said softly. "Rick Collins. He beats up guys like me for fun. His dad makes the tickets go away." I exchanged a look with Mike. The temperature in the lot seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Get Sarah in the cab, Mike. Lock the doors," I said, standing up and wiping the blood from my hands. "Leo stays with me. Jack, if the cops come, we deal with it. But right now I have a feeling Rick isn't going to the cops. He's going to get his big brothers." I was right, but I underestimated the scale. 20 minutes passed. I had Leo sitting in my passenger seat, wrapped in a wool blanket, drinking a cup of hot chocolate I'd brewed. He was starting to warm up, the shock wearing off, replaced by a dull ache he tried to hide. He told me he'd been on the streets for 6 months, ever since his mom died, and the foster system tried to split him from his dog, which, sadly, had been hit by a car 3 weeks ago. The kid was a survivor, tough as old leather, but with a heart that hadn't turned cold yet. Then the lights hit us. It wasn't one car this time. It was 3 heavy-duty pickups lifted with light bars that blinded you if you looked directly at them. They roared into the lot, bypassing the designated car parking and heading straight for the truck line. They boxed in my Peterbilt and Mike's Kenworth, parking at angles that blocked our forward exit. Doors slammed. I counted 8 men. These weren't high school kids. These were grown men, thick-necked, wearing Carhartt jackets and holding objects that weren't tools for fixing tires. Tire irons, baseball bats. One guy had a length of heavy chain wrapped around his fist. Leading them was a man in a sheriff's deputy uniform, but he wasn't wearing his hat, and his jacket was unzipped. He looked like an older, meaner version of the kid I'd punched. "Step out of the truck!" the deputy screamed, his hand resting near his holster. "I know you're in there!" I looked at Leo. He was shrinking back into the seat, terrified. "Stay down," I told him. "Lock the door behind me." "Jack, don't!" Leo whispered. "Lock it!" I grabbed the winch bar from beside my seat, 30 pounds of solid iron used for tightening cargo straps, and kicked my door open. I stepped out onto the fuel tank, standing tall, looking down at them. "Can I help you, officer?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "You assaulted my son," the deputy spat. "And you're harboring a fugitive. That street rat stole from the gas station. That street rat stopped your son from assaulting a 12-year-old girl," I countered. "And I didn't assault your boy. I stopped a felony in progress. I got Dashcam footage if you want to review the tape." I was bluffing about the Dashcam covering the fight. My camera faced forward and the fight had been to the side. But he didn't know that. The deputy's eyes narrowed. "I don't need tapes. I am the law here. Now hand over the kid, and maybe I don't impound this rig and throw you in a cell for resisting." "The kid stays," I said, tightening my grip on the winch bar. "Wrong answer," the deputy said. He motioned to the men behind him. "Pull him down. Get the kid." 2 of the men, big guys who looked like they bounced at the local dive bar, lunged for the steps of my truck. This was the escalation I had feared, the irreversible change. Once they put hands on me or my truck, there was no talking our way out. I didn't wait for them to climb. I swung the winch bar. I didn't aim for their heads. I wasn't trying to kill anyone, but I swung it hard against the steel railing of my steps just as the first guy reached for it. The clang was deafening, a bell tolling for the start of the fight. The vibration stung my hands, but it made the guy jump back. "Next one hits bone," I warned. "Get him!" the deputy screamed. One of the men circled around to the passenger side, trying to climb up to get Leo. I saw the door handle jiggle. Leo had locked it, thank God. But the guy raised a bat to smash the window. I couldn't stay on the steps. I had to protect that side. I jumped down from the driver's side, landing heavy in a crouch. The guy with the chains swung at me. I ducked, feeling the wind of the metal whistle past my ear. I drove my shoulder into his gut, tackling him onto the wet asphalt. We rolled, the cold water soaking my jeans instantly. He tried to wrap the chain around my neck, but I jammed my forearm under his chin, pushing up, gasping for air as we wrestled in the muck. Another guy kicked me in the ribs. Pain flared, sharp and hot. I grunted, rolling away, scrambling to my feet. I was surrounded, 3 in front, 2 circling back. Mike was out of his truck now, wielding a tire thumper, keeping 2 guys away from Sarah's door, but we were outnumbered 2 to 1. The deputy stood back, smiling. "Teach them a lesson, boys, then drag that rat out." I raised the winch bar, my breath coming in white puffs of steam. My ribs throbbed, and I could taste blood where I'd bitten my tongue. I was tired, I was hurting, and I was getting too old for this. but I looked up at the passenger window and saw Leo's face pressed against the glass, eyes wide with fear. He'd stood up for us. I wasn't going to let him down. "Come on then," I yelled, stepping forward to meet the rush. "Let's see what you got." The guy closest to me lunged, swinging a bat aimed at my knees. I didn't try to block it. I stepped into it. I took the hit on my thigh, a deadening thud that sent a shockwave up my hip, but it put me inside his guard. I dropped the winch bar and grabbed him by the collar of his jacket and his belt. With a grunt that tore at my bruised ribs, I used his own momentum to pivot and slam him back first into the fuel tank of my Peterbilt. The hollow gong of the aluminum tank rang out like a war drum. He slid down, gasping, the fight knocked out of him. But I didn't have time to celebrate. The other two were on me. One tackled me from behind, wrapping his arms around my chest, pinning my arms to my sides. The other, the one with the chain, stepped in grinning, wrapping the heavy links around his knuckles. "Hold him still," Chain Guy hissed. I couldn't break the grip of the man behind me. He was heavy, smelling of stale beer and cheap cologne, his weight dragging me down. The Chain Guy drew back his fist. I did the only thing I could. I picked my feet up and let my weight drop, dragging the guy behind me down with me. We hit the wet asphalt hard. The Chain Guy's punch missed my face by an inch, slamming into his buddy's shoulder instead. The guy holding me screamed and let go. I scrambled away on hands and knees, splashing through a puddle of oil and rainwater, trying to regain my footing. My breath was coming in ragged gasps. My leg was on fire where the bat had connected. Across the gap, Big Mike was fighting a losing battle. He was a big man, strong as an ox, wielding that tire thumper like a club, keeping 3 guys at bay near Sarah's door, but one of them had managed to climb the passenger steps. I heard the sound of glass shattering, the passenger window of the Kenworth. Sarah screamed. That scream cut through the haze of my pain. It wasn't fear anymore. It was pure terror. "Mike, the door!" I roared, trying to get to him, but the deputy stepped in my path. He wasn't smiling anymore. He had his baton out, extended to full length, and he swung it with professional precision. It cracked against my forearm as I raised it to block, sending a jolt of numbness down to my fingers. I stumbled back. "You're done, old man," the deputy snarled. "You're going to the hospital, then you're going to jail. And that rat inside your truck, he's never going to be seen again." He raised the baton for a headshot. I was backed against the grill of my truck. My arm was useless. My leg was throbbing. I braced myself, preparing to take the hit, preparing to bleed. Honk! The sound was deafening. It wasn't a car horn. It was the twin air horns of my Peterbilt, blasting directly above our heads. The vibration shook the fillings in my teeth. Inside the cab, Leo was standing on the driver's seat, pulling the ceiling cord with both hands, his face twisted in a mask of desperate defiance. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was sounding the alarm. The sudden noise made the deputy flinch. He looked up, distracted for a split second. That second was all I needed. I didn't use my fists. I used my head, literally. I launched myself forward, driving my forehead into the bridge of the deputy's nose. It's a dirty move, a brawler's move, but when you're fighting for your life, there are no rules. There was a sickening crunch, and the deputy staggered back, dropping his baton, clutching his face, blood spurting through his fingers. "Get them!" he screamed, his voice muffled and wet. "Shoot them if you have to!" He reached for his holster. The escalation hit the ceiling. He was pulling a gun. In a truck stop parking lot, on unarmed men. This was no longer a beatdown. This was about to be an execution. "Gun!" I shouted, diving behind the front wheel of my rig. But before the deputy could clear leather, the world exploded with light. It started to the left. A set of high beams flicked on, then another set to the right. Then the fog lights of the truck opposite us. Then the spotlights of a cattle hauler 3 rows back. Within 3 seconds, the dark corner of the lot was bathed in a blinding, sterile white brilliance. It was brighter than noon. The rain looked like falling diamonds in the crossbeams of 50 different trucks. The sudden illumination froze everyone. The goons with the bats covered their eyes. The guy climbing into Mike's truck froze halfway through the broken window. The deputy, blinded, squinted into the glare, his hand still on the grip of his pistol, but hesitating. Then came the sound. It started as a low rumble, the sound of heavy doors opening and slamming shut. Then boots hitting the pavement, lots of boots. I peeked out from behind my tire. From the darkness beyond the lights they emerged. Truckers, men and women, some in pajama pants and flip-flops, some in jeans and work boots. Some holding tire irons, some holding fire extinguishers, some just holding their phones up, recording. They didn't run. They walked. A slow, silent tide of angry steel and denim. They formed a semicircle around the deputy's crew, cutting off the escape route to their pickups. There must have been 40 of them, maybe 50. The Brotherhood. It's a term people throw around loosely, but out here, when the chips are down, it's as real as the asphalt under your tires. A burly driver with a beard down to his chest, I recognized him as Tiny, a flatbedder from Texas, stepped to the front of the line. He held a heavy rusted chain in one hand and a phone in the other, streaming live. "You boys lost?" Tiny asked. His voice was deep, rumbling like an idling V8. The deputy wiped the blood from his eyes, trying to regain his composure. He pointed a shaking finger at Tiny. "This is a police operation. Interfere and you're all under arrest. Back off." Tiny didn't blink. He just looked at the phone in his hand, then back at the deputy. "Police operation? Looks like an assault to me. And to the 4,000 people watching this live stream right now." The deputy's face went pale beneath the blood. "Put that away." "Nah," Tiny said. "I don't think I will. See, we heard the horn, and we heard the radio. You know this rig," he pointed at my Peterbilt, "has a hot mic on the CB. We heard you tell your boys to drag the rat out. We heard you order them to shoot." I looked up at my cab. Leo. The kid must have bumped the CB handset when he scrambled over to pull the horn. The Channel 19 switch was open. Every trucker in the lot had heard the play-by-play of the deputy threatening to kill us. The deputy looked around. His goons were backing away, dropping their bats and chains. They were tough when it was 8 against 2, but against 50 furious truckers, they were nothing. "Get in the truck!" The deputy hissed to his son, the ringleader from earlier, who was now cowering behind one of the pickups. "You ain't going nowhere," a voice said from the left. A woman stepped out of the crowd. She was small, wearing a pink hoodie, but she held a lug wrench like she knew how to use it. "My rig is blocking the exit. And Big Dave over there," she pointed to a massive refrigerated hauler, "blocked the other lane. You're boxed in, sugar." The deputy panicked. He drew his gun fully now, aiming it wildly at the crowd. "Back up! I said back up, or I drop you." The silence that followed was terrifying. Nobody moved. Nobody ran. 50 pairs of eyes just narrowed. "Put it down, son," I said, stepping out from behind the wheel. I was limping, holding my side, but I stood tall. "You fire that thing, you might get one of us. Maybe 2. But you won't get all of us, and you won't leave this lot walking." It was a standoff on a razor's edge. The rain drummed on the hoods of the trucks. The deputy's hand was shaking. He was realizing that his badge didn't shine bright enough to blind this many witnesses. Then the distant wail of sirens cut through the air. Not local police sirens. These were different. "That's the state troopers," Tiny said calmly, checking his phone. "And probably the feds, considering I tagged the FBI in this stream about 5 minutes ago when you started threatening to kill a child." The deputy's shoulders slumped. He knew it was over. The gun lowered, inch by inch, until it hung limp at his side. One of his goons dropped a bat. It clattered loudly on the ground. "On your knees," I said. It wasn't a question. The deputy looked at me with pure hate, but he looked at the wall of truckers and saw the inevitable. Slowly, painfully, he dropped to his knees in the wet gravel. His son and the other thugs followed suit, hands raised, surrendering to the mob of drivers they had thought they could bully. I turned to my truck. The door opened, and Leo stepped out onto the fuel tank. He looked at the sea of lights, at the wall of truckers standing guard. He looked at me, bruised and bleeding, but standing. For the first time since I'd seen him, the kid didn't look like a ghost. He looked like he was seen. Mike came over, limp-walking, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, holding Sarah tight. She buried her face in his jacket, but then she peeked out, looking at Leo. "You okay, Jack?" Mike asked, his voice shaking. "I'll live," I said, spitting a glob of blood onto the pavement. "You?" "Thanks to you," Mike said. He looked at Leo. "And him." The state troopers rolled in 2 minutes later. It was a carnival of blue lights. They didn't come in aggressive. They saw the situation, the wall of trucks, the subdued men on the ground, the live streaming witnesses, and they understood immediately who was in charge of the scene. It wasn't them. It was us. They cuffed the deputy and his crew. The deputy tried to shout about jurisdiction, about his rights, about me assaulting him. The lead trooper, a grey-haired sergeant who looked like he'd seen it all, just pointed to Tiny's phone. "We'll review the footage, deputy," the trooper said dryly, "but from what I'm hearing, you're looking at aggravated assault, attempted murder, corruption, and a federal civil rights violation. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." As they loaded them into the cruisers, the paramedic team moved in to check on us. I sat on the running board of my truck, letting a medic tape up my ribs. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold ache that settled deep in my bones. The crowd of truckers didn't disperse immediately. They lingered, a silent vigil. Some came up and tapped my fist. Others just nodded and walked back to their rigs. It wasn't a victory parade. It was just an acknowledgement. We watch out for our own. Tiny walked over, the live stream finally off. He looked at Leo, who was sitting next to me, shivering under a foil blanket the paramedics had given him. "You got a good arm on that air horn, kid," Tiny grunted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $50 bill. He tucked it into Leo's pocket. "Buy yourself a steak." Leo looked at the money, then at Tiny, stunned. I don't take it," I said softly. "You earned it." The lot slowly returned to normal. The engines died down, the lights flicked off. The darkness returned, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. The medic finished with me. "You should go to the ER for x-rays, sir. Those ribs might be cracked." "I'll go in the morning," I lied. I wasn't going anywhere yet. I turned to Leo. He was staring at the spot where the deputy had been kneeling. "They're gone, Leo," I said. "They can't hurt you anymore." He said I was trash," Leo whispered, his voice trembling. "He said nobody would care." I looked at the boy. I looked at the line of trucks parked in the dark, the drivers sleeping inside, the men and women who had stood in the rain for a stranger. "He was wrong," I said. "The silence after the chaos is always the loudest part of the night." The blue lights had faded into the distance, hauling away the men who thought a badge gave them the right to break bones. The lot was quiet again, save for the rhythmic chug of reefers and the drip of rainwater off the trailers. I sat on my step, nursing a lukewarm coffee I'd brewed, while the adrenaline crashed out of my system. My ribs were screaming every time I took a deep breath, a dull, grinding ache that I knew would turn purple by morning. Big Mike walked over, leading Leo. The kid looked different. He'd washed the blood off his face in the restroom, and he was wearing a clean flannel shirt Mike had dug out of his sleeper. It swallowed him whole, but he looked warm. "Jack," Mike said, his voice low. "We were talking." He put a heavy hand on Leo's shoulder. The kid didn't flinch this time. "Leo here doesn't have anyone waiting on him," Mike continued. "And I got an empty bunk in the back until we hit Omaha. My sister runs a fostering program out there. The good kind. No cages, real homes." I looked at Leo. "That true? You willing to ride with this ugly mug?" Leo managed a small, crooked smile. It hurt his split lip, but it was real. "He said I could pick the music." God help you," I chuckled, wincing as my side protested. "He listens to polka." Mike laughed, a relief-filled sound that broke the last of the tension. It's country gold, Jack. Country gold. I stood up, groaning as my joints popped. I reached into my cab and pulled out my heavy canvas coat, the one with the fleece lining I used for the northern runs. I tossed it to Leo. "You're gonna need this in Omaha," I said. "Wind cuts right through you out there." Leo caught it, burying his face in the collar for a second. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. "Why did you do it? You didn't even know me. You could have just kept driving." I looked out at the wet asphalt, at the spot where he'd taken a beating to protect a little girl he didn't know. "You stood up when everyone else stayed seated, Leo," I said quietly. "That makes you one of us. We don't leave our own behind." He nodded, unable to speak. He turned and followed Mike back to the red Kenworth. Sarah was waiting in the passenger seat, waving at him. I watched them climb in. I watched the door close. I watched the cab lights go out as they settled in for the night. I climbed back into my own rig, the sanctuary of the cab wrapping around me like a steel cocoon. I locked the doors. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the rain start up again, tapping against the glass. I was sore. I was tired. I was going to be looking over my shoulder for a few 100 miles, wondering if that deputy had friends in the next county. But as I released the parking brake and put the Peterbilt in gear, feeling the engine hum through the soles of my boots, the pain in my ribs didn't feel like an injury. It felt like the price of admission, and tonight it was worth every penny. I eased the clutch out, rolling toward the highway, leaving the lights of the truck stop in my mirrors. Just another ghost on the asphalt, headed for the horizon. Thank you for watching, and if stories like this one about courage, sacrifice, and second chances speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more incredible true stories that honor the forgotten heroes among us.